Hey friends, Bruce here with Cross Country 3. This is the Sentinel broadcast, and I want to talk a little bit about the Great Exchange and ask this question: why did Jesus have to die on the cross? One of the greatest illustrations that I've ever heard to help answer that question about why Jesus had to die on the cross, well, it goes something like this. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there was a king known throughout the land as a just king and a loving king. The people within the kingdom loved him. Well, one day it was discovered that in that kingdom, someone had been stealing from the king's treasury. Now, because the king was just as a king, well, he issued a decree, and the decree went like this: whoever is caught stealing from the treasury will receive 10 lashes. Here's the thing. The thefts continued. And so the king issued another punishment or decree, and he raised it up to 20 lashes. And yet this stealing continued. And so he raised it again. He raised it to 30 lashes. The thefts continued. And then finally he issued this decree: whoever is caught stealing from the treasury will receive 40 lashes. Everyone in the kingdom knew exactly what that meant. You see, 40 lashes was a death sentence. And then the shocking, stunning truth came out. The one stealing from the treasury was none other than the king's own daughter. Suddenly, one question spread throughout the kingdom, and that question went like this: what will the king do? Some believed, of course, the king would simply forgive her. Well, why wouldn't he? But if he did, how could he be the just king that he is? And then others believed that the king would carry out the sentence. But if he did that, how could he be loving, especially to his own daughter? Well, the king himself wrestled with this decision. It was tough, but he finally declared, the sentence is just and the punishment must stand. Well, the day of judgment finally arrived. The entire kingdom gathered to watch. They wanted to know how this would go. The princess was brought forward. She was tied to the whipping post. The executioner raised his whip. But just as he was about to strike that first blow, the king stepped forward and he shouted, "Stop." Silence fell over the crowd. What was he going to do? Well, the king walked closer toward his daughter. He removed his royal robe, and then he took off his shirt. And then he wrapped his own body around his own daughter, shielding her completely. And then the king looked back over his shoulder at the executioner, and he said, "Now carry out the sentence." The executioner, of course, hesitated. "Your Majesty," he said, "if I strike her, the lashes are going to fall on you." And the king replied, "The sentence must stand. Now strike." And so the executioner did what he was told, and one by one, 40 lashes fell. Every blow that was intended for the daughter landed on the father, the king, instead. My friend, the king died so the daughter could live. Do you see the picture? The king remained just because the penalty for the crime was paid. And yet the king remained loving because he paid for the penalty himself. That is the heart of the Bible, is the heart of Christianity, the heart of the gospel. It is the heart of God. The Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death. Our God, our King, is perfectly holy. Justice demands that sin be punished. Now imagine a judge who looked at a man who was guilty of abusing a child and said to that man, "You're sorry, it looks like. You can go free." We would never ever call that justice. You see, a good judge must uphold the law. And in the same way, God cannot simply overlook sin. The Apostle Paul put it this way. It's a beautiful statement. For our sake, he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. That is what theologians call the great exchange, appropriately termed. You see, Jesus took our sin and we receive his righteousness. Justice required that sin be paid for. But here is the incredible news, that God is also love. Oh, he's just, but he's love. So instead of demanding that we make the payment ourselves, he made the payment for us. He's the only one that could. Jesus Christ took our place. The punishment that belonged to us fell on him. The cross is where the justice of God and the love of God meet. Justice was satisfied on the cross. Love was demonstrated on the cross. Romans chapter 3 tells us that God is both just as the one who justifies those who have faith in him. Because Jesus took our punishment, those who trust in him can walk away forgiven and free, not because God ignored sin, but because Christ paid for that sin in full. That's why Jesus had to die on the cross. Not because God stopped loving us, but because he loved us so much that he was willing to bear the punishment himself. Now that's true sacrificial love. Let me leave you with this encouragement or exhortation. Perhaps you've been carrying around guilt for years. Maybe you've made decisions that you wish you could undo. Maybe you believe you've wandered too far from God. Perhaps you think that you've failed too many times or that you've accumulated too much shame to ever be forgiven. Well, know this, the cross says otherwise. The cross declares that your sin is indeed serious, but God's grace is greater than that sin, no matter what it is. It tells us that no one is beyond the reach of God's mercy and his love. Just come to him by faith. You don't have to keep punishing yourself, dear friend, for what Jesus has already paid for. You don't have to. You don't have to live a life chained to yesterday when Christ offers you a brand new beginning today. If you're a follower of Jesus, then remember who you are. You're not defined by your worst decision. You're not defined by your greatest failure. You're not defined by what others have said about you or to you. You are not defined by what others have done to you. You are defined by the one who stretched out his hands across that cross and he said, "It is finished," paid in full. If you've trusted Christ, then know that you belong to him. If you've not trusted Christ, know that you can belong to him and be forgiven and free forever. He offers forgiveness, reconciliation with God, and the promise of eternal life, not because we've earned it, but because he has. The cross is not merely a symbol of suffering then. It is the greatest declaration of love the world has ever known. So don't leave it as just another story. Receive this wonderful gift. Walk in his grace. Live in his freedom. And never forget, the God who is just enough to punish sin is the very same God who loved you enough to take that punishment upon himself. And my friend, it doesn't get any better than that. Take care. Godspeed.